Welcome to Download, where we bring you discussion and analysis from a Catholic perspective. Today is Wednesday, August 16th, 2023. I'm Brady Light here with my two co-hosts, Simon Rafe and the unstoppable T. Ray Brock. Hey, guys. Troubles brewing in Australia with a major prelate calling for exceptions to priestly celibacy, specifically for Indigenous communities. With more on this story, our reporter, Dr. William Mahoney. Hey, William, what's going on in the land down under?
So the Archbishop of Brisbane, Mark Coleridge, is saying that the Aboriginal men who are married should be admitted to the priesthood. And he's hinting that, well, the Vatican's going to relax its rules on priestly celibacy anyway. So that's basically what he's arguing for.
So what's his big revelation on why all of a sudden his folks down, the Indigenous people, they need to have celibacy or jettison celibacy and have a married clergy?
Well, his reason is that in order for the church to flourish, that it has to adapt to different cultures. And, so it's basically just a kind of enculturation based on his interpretation of their culture.
So the whole celibacy thing, we've had a pretty good run of celibacy, success with celibacy. The whole gay marriage thing, the whole sex abuse stuff, that was 80% homosexual. So you can't, marriage isn't going to fix their problem because you don't have gay marriage in the church. So why all this? I still don't get why can't Indigenous people, like they have in every other culture for 2,000 years, adopt celibacy?
Well, I would argue that his statement is extremely racist because he's basically like, they can't handle this. And he's also suggests to me that he's underplaying the main element of priestly celibacy, and that is that it's a grace from God. It's not something you do of your own will. It's not something you just white knuckle your way through life, not getting married or something. It is a gift from God. He says so in the gospel. He says when the apostles said it's better not to marry if that's the case, and he said not all can accept this teaching except to those whom it's been given. So it's a particular grace that God gives, and what he's basically suggesting is either he doesn't believe that or he doesn't think God can offer that grace to Aboriginal people. I don't really, it's a very strange take.
Okay, Simon.
Yeah, so I'm not going to get into the racist thing right now with you, B. I'll get into it later in the show, because I think you and I are in 100% agreement on this. This is like one of the most shockingly racist statements that I've seen, slightly more racist than the average Looney Tunes cartoon from 1950. But also, I just wanted to point out, there's actually an Australian professor, another person from down under, Renee Kohler-Ryan, who's actually been kind of pushing back on this, and she's made a number of statements, which I do want to read, and really, she's kind of not necessarily directly addressing the issue that Coleridge is bringing up, but really just promoting celibacy and saying some good things about it. And she says, spiritually speaking, they're really married to the church, meaning the priests, and the priests, are giving their whole lives to this vocation. And I think we're not good enough, generous enough as a society in realizing what a special relationship it is. And she also goes on to say, to be a priest is to be serving and giving one's whole life like Christ gave his whole life. So I think that obviously, while that doesn't directly address Coleridge's comments and some of the racist implications there, I think it is very important for us to recognize just how wonderful and important celibacy can be as an example of sacrifice. Priests are beginning their vocation with sacrifice, continuing it through with sacrifice, and this constant sacrifice of self will help them be people who can offer sacrifice at the Mass.
I think that's correct. Another thing about priestly celibacy is it's very ancient. It's not like the church just made this up in the Middle Ages, as some would have you believe. Of course, we know that in the early church there were married men, but the part they don't tell you is that synods at Elvira, Hippo, Carthage, they required that if you did that, you had to live more uxorior, which is you were then continent with your wife from that point forward. So you no longer engaged in the marital act. That, and also even in the Orthodox Church, remember, they don't pull their bishops from married men. They that's a rule they did too. They went in a different direction in about the 600s, but they pull from mostly monks or a man whose wife has died. And also in the Orthodox and the Byzantine churches, if you are married and you become a priest, you also if your wife dies, you're not free to remarry either. So they really try to paint this picture that, oh, it was just in the Middle Ages the church made this up. No, there's great books on it. Cardinal Alphonse Stickler wrote a book, The Case for Priestly Celibacy. Another Jesuit, Christian Cocchini wrote a book, The Apostolic Origins of Priestly Celibacy. So it's not like something the church just made up. As to this lady's point, the celibacy, yes, you're serving the church and all, but also the priest is different than just the ordinary baptized. As baptized, we're all conformed to Christ. That's correct. But the priest, in a particular way, with an indelible mark on his soul that lasts for all of eternity, he's made in persona Christi capitis, in the person of Christ, the head. So he has a very different role to offer the supreme sacrifice and to save souls. And the last thing I'd say about that is his fatherhood is real, but his fatherhood is spiritual. So he, like St. Paul said, he begets children in the gospel. That's what they do. They baptize. When you sin, they absolve you and bring you back to your baptismal innocence. They feed you with the Eucharist, from which all the other sacraments flow. And when they say, this is my body, this is my blood, in the Mass, they're saying it with Christ, through him, with him, and in him. So they better be offering some sacrifices too.
Yes. Yeah, I think it obviously, you talked about a number of examples there, be of the married priests. And obviously we have married priests today. There are ones in a lot of the Eastern rites of the Catholic Church. And of course, there are some men who were married before they became priests. Sometimes, for example, if a man was a member of the Anglican clergy and he was married and then he becomes a Catholic and he converts and he becomes a Catholic priest, he doesn't divorce, he doesn't separate, he remains married at that point. I've known actually a number of married priests, and they've all actually been wonderful priests. I've never actually known a married priest who wasn't a wonderful priest. But the notion of just kind of let's rescind celibacy as some sort of discipline, let's rescind it as some kind of practice that we're going to do, and especially let's do it just for the Aborigines. Yeah, that sounds like a terrible plan. All right, I think we're good with you here. B, did you have a question, Trey?
Yeah, I'll ask one question,
apologize. Yes.
William. Do you think this is a slippery slope in the sense that if you allow this exception in Australia, that it could result in some incrementalism where you have priests or bishops saying that maybe this whole celibacy thing is something that we should reconsider? Do you think it's a slippery slope? Allowing more exceptions could result in something that some priests and bishops who would want that could start talking about?
Well, in the case of Archbishop Coleridge, I'd say it's more than a slippery slope. He hints of it more being like a plan. So now he's saying about the Aborigines that they should have married men that become priests. But he said something to the effect that, well, the Vatican's going to reconsider that anyway. So I think it's beyond slippery slope. It's obvious that their plan is his plan is incremental, and of course people will talk about it and so on and so forth.
Well, thank you very much, B. That point about the Vatican going to reconsider almost makes you wonder if there's something going on behind the scenes between the Vatican and Australia there. So, but thank you very much also for your comments on the priesthood itself. That was very inspiring. Always wonderful to talk with you. Have a good day,
Thank you,
William.
You too.
Yeah, one practical thing here I'd like to just bring up, and I want to bring it up right away, that the thing that just sticks with me on all this comes from St. Paul, his 1 Corinthians, chapter 7, verse 33 and 34. Just the practicality here. He says, "But he that is with a wife is solicitous for the things of the world, how he may please his wife, and he is divided. And the unmarried woman and the virgin thinks on the things of the Lord, that she may be holy in both body and spirit. But she that is married thinks on the things of the world, how she may please her husband. And she is divided." So that practicality, being a married man, being in religious life, Third Order Franciscan for many years, then also being in a married state, really start to understand that, hey man, when you're called to marry, and the needs of your family are pulling on you all the time. It's like, hey, honey, we're going to have a birthday party for our son tonight. Oh, I have a funeral, I got to preach this. I got to prepare a homily. I have to. 2 in the morning, I got to make a sick call. You're not in bed on your own as a priest in a rectory, who's just able to be, okay, I've got to go do this right now. You're affecting immediately other people around you. and that is actually taking away from that calling to help sanctify them. So there's a dividedness there that I don't think ever really gets healed or totally addressed. I don't care if you're an East or West, good man or not. I mean, you only got so many hours in the day and so much manhood to offer.
And I think as well, there's another interesting thing. See, you're looking there at the example you gave as this question of, okay, we've got a birthday party. You know, the priest and his wife have a birthday party for their son, and, you know, the sick call. Okay, there's somebody who's dying. Okay, well, let's talk about it. You know, your son, if he's old enough, he's going to understand. Your wife, hopefully, is certainly going to understand. It's like, well, this person's dying. You should absolutely go there. And, you know, fine. Okay, so that circle is somewhat squareable. But what happens if it's your son is lying in the hospital and you should be by his side holding his hand, and there's some of your parishioners are lying in the hospital and you should be there administering the sacraments to them? Which way do you choose? You have a pull at that point. That what you have in many cases with this is you have a circle that cannot be squared. You can talk about the dividedness of the man who maybe works a lot. He's some high-powered executive and he's on Wall Street or something. He's working all hours that God sends and so forth. And his wife and his children never see him. They're very upset. They're very disappointed. They're very angry. And it's, of course, you know what? We should be more important because we're your family. Well, okay, and that's perfectly reasonable. I side with you, lady and son. I side with you. But when you come along and say, you should be with us, we are your family, well, they are my flock. This becomes an irreconcilable thing.
Continually, ongoing.
You have this immovable object in the series.
And it's not like once a year that happens.
This is going to, if you're a good priest, it's going to be consciously happening. I just want to get, and the practicality, I think, is the main thing for why priestly celibacy should be a good thing. But this was kicked off by Coleridge's comments. And I want to address them, and I want to address the racism issue that B did. And if people have listened to the download for a while, they will know that, like, this soft bigotry of low expectations that seems to be out there among European and Eurocentric Catholics is absolutely unacceptable. So it starts out with, was it Casper from Germany, with the Africans should not tell us so much what is going on?
It's 2015, the family,
did that.
on the family.
Yep, it's that thing. Well, the Africans shouldn't be telling us. You know what? The Africans have a thriving church. You know what? The Africans are not sitting there in mud huts. If you go to Nairobi looks like something out of Star Trek. It's incredible. It's a beautiful city. You have Coleridge saying, oh yeah, the indigenous people, they can't get this. They can't quite understand celibacy. I assure you that Aborigines are not all, none of them really, are not extras from the latest Crocodile Dundee movie for a comedy effect. They are people with education and learning and a history and a culture who have adopted Catholicism. They have been baptized into Catholicism. They are quite capable of understanding the notion that a man does not have sex. They're quite capable of dealing with that. All of this stuff, when it comes around, it says the Africans shouldn't tell us what to do. The indigenous people can't accept it. Oh, we should have these in these remote communities. We should, in the Amazon and so forth, we should have priestly celibacy resisted. We should change the rules. We should make things different for the indigenous people. It is absolutely the racism, the bigotry of low expectations. It is the same psychology as the people who say, oh, voter ID, that is racist because apparently black folks can't find the DMV. I assure you that they can. It is also the same ridiculous kind of racism as you see on the History Channel, where that guy with the ridiculous swept back hair goes, aliens, after every single thing. Oh, the pyramids were built by aliens. Why were the pyramids built by aliens? Oh, well, they had to be built by aliens because I am of European extraction, and how could they possibly have been built by Africans in the Bronze Age? No. People who are not white have sophistication, they have intelligence, they have culture, they are quite capable of it. And this racism, this soft bigotry of low expectations, which apparently just gets a pass within the liberal church, I am sick and tired of it.
Well, it's the same philosophy behind affirmative action, where you lower the standard for certain people because you don't think that they have the capability to do what everybody else is doing. So it's the same exact philosophy. But getting back to celibacy, and we've talked about this on the download before, where it gets rid of a little bit of the sacrifice involved in becoming a priest, making the decision to go to seminary. Well, not just go to seminary because that's part of the discernment process, but to become a priest, you're giving up marriage and the family. It's a huge sacrifice. I can't imagine a bigger sacrifice in life. I'm willingly giving up marriage and the family so I can go become a priest. And this problem, actually, I looked up some, because the Catechism, or not the Catechism of Trent, the Council of Trent has some really good statements on the priesthood And it makes the distinction between the layman and the priest in there. And it was obviously responding to the heresy of Protestantism, responding to Luther, who denied all the sacraments. He said he held on to the belief that baptism and he called it the bread. He was talking about the Eucharist. You know, he believed in consubstantiation and all that. But anyways, he essentially made no distinction, no real distinction between the layman and the priest. And he also said something, this is a quote from him. He says, "I cannot understand why one who has been made a priest cannot again become a layman." Obviously, he was trying to justify his own, you know, his own distorted lifestyle, because he was ordained a priest. I think it was 1505, and so he's trying to convince himself that, oh, I'm okay.
Because he went away and got married.
Exactly. Yep. But anyways, that distinction between the priest and the layman, the priest, that distinct difference. Obviously, they're able to confect the sacraments. Luther denied all of that for the most part, so of course he's not going to see a reason for the priesthood. But yeah, go ahead, Brad.
On that point right there, Archbishop Sheen was talking about the priests today. Now he's talking like in the 1930s, 40s, 50s, 60s. He was saying the priests all want to be priest, like Christ was priest, but very, very few want to be the victim, as Christ was victim. They want to be the offerer, but not the offered. And if there is anything that you are the offered more in sacrificing, they desire. And it's not just the sexual instinct here. We're talking about the whole loving in that manner and having children and all those type of things, which is it's this biological instinct, which is and if you were to be all the virtues you have to be a good father, you would also have to be a good priest. So if you're like, well, I just don't like marriage, well, you're probably not going to be a very good priest and a spiritual father to your flock at your parish. And talking about low expectations, we've been having low expectations with everybody in the last 10 years. The whole LGBT, they're not called to chastity. You know, and if you need to use contraception and you need, you know, divorced and remarried and on. Everybody's got low expectations.
Well, that was Father Martin, wasn't it? It's like that the LGBT people are not called to chastity because they have not received the teaching.
Right.
Meaning, I think, I'm not entirely sure what he meant by that. I don't know if he really explained it terribly well, but it certainly seemed when you read what he said that it was, well, they don't have to follow it because they don't believe they have to follow it, which is like, is that the excuse? Because that is great, asking for a friend.
It goes back to your first point about lowering the expectation, lowering the bar. When Martin says that to these people, he's essentially saying, at least, you know, I think he's saying you don't have the capability of doing this. Yeah. You're incapable of doing this, and that's a complete lie. And he lowers the bar like you were talking about to begin with.
Yeah. The whole reason, another great reason, I think, for the celibate priesthood is because the priest is up there preaching and in the confessional counseling, asking parishioners to have a higher expectation, to lay down the contraceptives, to stop fornicating, to stop cohabitating, and not just the sexual sin. Stop being avaricious, stop being a slave to your job, start being more with your family, on and on. And he himself has to be the exemplar of that. So how much better if he's not just rolling in the bucks, having every thing that he possibly can want just pandered to monetarily, has to lay down the sexual, there's a whole desire to, you know, someone who loses their, or is divorced and has to remain that way. They're the great heroes. Someone who is wanting to practice contraception because they have 5 kids or 6 kids or 7 kids, and they want to say, I don't want to have any more kids, but I'm still very young in my life. I want to go on and do other things or whatever. All these things, you need to be that priest who is that right before them, the tangible book. Not, this is where the Council of Trent says it. This is where I'm living this. I'm asking you to do something that I'm also showing you and leading you the way. That's what Christ did. He was teaching by not only his words, but tremendously by his example. And that's which is another reason why the priests should be conforming themselves even in that way to Christ. But that I think really not only the practicality of saying, you know, day in and day out, I'm divided between my biological family and my spiritual family. Yeah. But the practicality of saying, hey, I'm asking you to do a lot of things that may be very difficult for you, and I want to lead the way in that. I mean, Trey, as a football player and stuff, right? I mean, how inspiring is it to have the coach down there with the guys working out, before, running the drills and that type of thing. It's just amazing when you get the coaching involved in that physical way.
Yeah, when you're seeing it, and not necessarily hearing it, or you don't, from guys who are good leaders, you don't necessarily need them to say anything. You can just see the way that they're living it out. You're seeing what they're doing throughout their day, and the way that they're coaching and all that stuff. And it's just that example, like you were just talking about, the example of being able to see that, be it your father, or be it a coach or whoever, some sort of mentor or whatever, seeing them actually living it out, practicing what they're preaching is huge. And that's why the worst thing you can be in life as a hypocrite is because you're saying all these great things, you're running your mouth, and then the kids are seeing, the coach or whoever it is, a mentor, who's he's not living it out. You can tell by the way that he's going about his day that he actually doesn't believe what he's saying. And so there's that cognitive dissonance, and that's what doesn't connect with kids with regard to sports and all of that. But
yeah, one thing that I want to address, because I think B touched on it very briefly, and this is going to be a thing that a lot of the audience is going to hear out there, is this idea, and we see it in our comment section. People will come in, and good Catholics, putatively good Catholics, I mean, these people aren't spouting heresies and so forth, but they will say this, and they will say, well, we need to get rid of priestly celibacy, we need to allow for the married priesthood, because that will address the sexual abuse crisis. And I want to address that utter falsehood. Okay, so here is the concern. First off, the sexual abuse crisis in the Catholic Church is overwhelmingly a homosexual sexual abuse crisis. It was adult men preying on younger men. It was not them preying on children, it was preying on younger men, post-pubescent men. So these are males who have, and obviously there are physical changes that occur in puberty. For men, once they go through puberty, their shoulders get broader, they put on muscle mass, their voices get deeper, they get hair on their bodies and so forth as they go through. Women, their hips widen, their breasts grow, etc., etc., etc. These are just the superficial changes. So when you are discussing this idea of, okay, you've got these guys who are engaging in sexual predation against post-pubescent men, so they're engaging with young men, marrying them to an adult woman is not going to address that.
Well, first of all, they're not going to be drawn to that.
Well,
they
exactly.
don't want that. I'm
That's
not
the thing.
drawn to that.
They're not drawn to that.
They're going to do it.
That's the whole point. It's like when you actually look at it, there is a vast number. The commonest example of actual child abuse, if we want to discuss child abuse, prepubescent, the commonest example of the person who abuses a child is his parents. Shocking and horrible as it is, they are the people with access, with the ability to do it. Those people have access to sex within marriage, and yet because they are damaged and what have you, whatever is causing them to do this, they still choose to do this terrible thing. So allowing the priesthood to get married, to have sex with an adult woman, is not going to address a distorted desire to have homosexual sex with a younger man, or indeed to have abusive sex with a young child. And so that's the point. What you're going to do there is you're offering this up as a solution. It is not a solution. It's not going to help. It's just going to provide a degree of cover for these people.
Well, the other thing is the fact is you don't allow priests ever to marry. Priests don't marry unless you're laicized and you're no longer functioning the prerogative and the dignity of, or duties of being a priest. Never in the East or the West has someone who's had hands laid on them as a deacon, priest, or bishop ever been allowed to remarry, ever. So there's never been a priest who's married after he's ordained, a deacon married after he's ordained. Like I say, if you're laicized, that's a separate issue. Mm-hmm. But you're still a priest, but you're no longer functioning, being viewed or utilized in the church as a priest. But the fact is, this is not going to serve, 78, I don't know how many tens of thousands of priests we have in America. None of them can get married unless they're laicized. So this is only affecting the new crop. The new crop wants to be challenged, wants to be seen as the military, the Green Beret. I'm going to do something great for God. And this is a quote here in Mark 10:29. That talks about that sacrifice and the reward that comes with it. Amen, I say to you, there is no man, Jesus is speaking to them, who has left house or brethren or sisters or father or mother or children or lands or future wife, doesn't say that, but I'll put that in there, or future wife, possibility of marrying, for my sake and for the gospel, who shall not receive 100 times as much now in this time, houses, brethren, sisters, mother, children, and lands, with persecutions, he puts in there, and in the world to come, life everlasting. So the idea that you are, and I would have to say this too, as being in the Third Order Franciscans for many years, the relationship you have with so many people who see you as a representative, an authentic, true, sincere representative of the gospel message. Yeah, a bus pulls up, and in 2 minutes, once you get on and sit down, that when they were married and the struggles they have and the difficulties and what them deeper than their spouse does, men and women. You'll know children far better than their parents will in a very short period of time. You have authentic, deep, spiritual friendships here. Mother lands more, and the women, or the mothers, the fathers will take you as a spiritual son on such a deeper level that it is extremely rewarding. And I don't know of anybody that's ever lived chastity or celibacy within priestly celibacy or in religious life, had a good spiritual life, good prayer life, and all that didn't deeply respond to those gifts, that wasn't deeply lavished by God with tremendous gifts. It's the half-hearted, looking back, and all this type of stuff. Grass is always greener on the other side. And these idiots that go off from the priesthood and go get married, they didn't live a good spiritual fatherhood there, and they're not making good spiritual husbands and their wives, and they're having difficulties there as well. So offer that sacrifice, be that victim along with the priesthood. And it's man up. It's the bottom line. Well,
I think Luther is the perfect example of the guy who did not live up to his ordination, to the indelible mark that he had on his by virtue of his ordination. And I think the hard part about all of this is you have the priesthood, and you have these. And it's actually interesting looking back at the history of all of this with the Council of Trent, what Luther was saying, because, and I think we've talked about this before, where he's starting out and he's addressing some real issues, right? He could have been a great saint. He just went off the deep end and denied the authority of the church, denied the sacraments, all of that stuff. But understanding the priesthood in the way that the church understands it is, I think it's vitally important to everything with regard to celibacy, because as you mentioned, as we talked about, you're not giving anything up, even with the guys who are same-sex attracted. I think a good seminary is going to say, well, you're not giving anything up. I'm not going to, I don't think you're ready for this. But understanding that distinction, what the priest's role is, what the layman's role is. It's vitally important to not go to one extreme or the other. To not, to understand the distinctions, but to not say that a priest is way up here and the laymen are just way down here. They don't have They don't have a role. They don't have a vocation, which is obviously what Luther did not understand. But yeah.
Wherever everybody's called to holiness, and you got 4 states of life: sanctified, single, married, religious, and not everybody's evangelical. He who's called is the one is called to that state of life. Everybody has a state of life, and everybody is called to holiness in whatever state of life you find yourself in. Thanks you so much for joining us for today's episode of The Download. Now please join us as we finish in prayer, begging Our Lady's intercession for our nation and our church. In the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit.
Amen.
Salve Regina, Mater Misericordiae, vita dulcedo
et spes nostra salve. A te clamamus exules filii Eve. A te suspiramus gementes efflentes, in hac lacrimarum vale. Ea ergo advocata nostra, ilos tuos misericordes oculos ad nos converte. Et Iesum benedictum fructum ventris tui, nobis post hoc exilium ostende, o clemens, o pia, o dulcis Virgo Maria.
Amen. In the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit.
Amen.
Thank you again for joining us for The Download. We premiere a new episode like this every weekday at 5 p.m. Eastern Time from all of us here at Church Militant. God bless you.